Everyone laughed when Jackie Chan mocked Chuck Norris karate right on stage. The crowd roared, the cameras rolled, and Chan himself was confident that he had won the show with his humor alone. But no one expected Chuck to take the next step. His calmness gave way to action, and what happened next blew up the entire hall and silenced thousands of spectators in shock. Subscribe to the channel and write in the comments where you are watching this video from. The vast ballroom of the MGM Grand shimmered beneath thousands of suspended lights, each one reflected on the polished marble floor, like stars scattered across a desert sky. The Las Vegas night pulsed outside with its usual neon brilliance, but inside the atmosphere was electric in its own unique way. This was not an ordinary evening of gambling and spectacle. Tonight was a charity gala dedicated to the advancement of martial arts, a gathering of legends and newcomers, of movie stars and real fighters, of fans who had grown up idolizing their heroes and students still dreaming of following in their footsteps. The air was perfumed with expensive cologne and champagne, yet beneath it lingered the sharper scent of expectation, as though something unplanned waited to happen. Chuck Norris entered with the quiet composure that had defined his public image for decades. He wore a simple black suit, impeccably pressed but understated, paired with a crisp white shirt without a tie. His steps were unhurried, his shoulders straight, his expression calm, and yet every movement suggested discipline refined over a lifetime. Beside him walked his wife Gina, elegant in a deep blue dress, her hand lightly touching his arm in the way of partners long accustomed to moving in step. Behind them followed their daughter Dakota, her youthful energy tempered tonight by an awareness of the importance of the event. Cameras shifted instantly toward them, and the applause that rippled across the hall carried a different tone than for other celebrities. It was not the shrill adoration of novelty, but the deep respect reserved for someone who had stood the test of time. Though Chuck acknowledged the applause with a small nod and faint smile, his demeanor remained almost monastic. He had never been one to revel in spectacle. To him, the path of martial arts had always been about humility, discipline, and service. Yet he knew he was here as much for the image as for the cause, to remind younger generations that martial arts were not simply about fighting or fame, but about shaping character. His family's presence made it personal. For Gina, who had stood by him through decades of public scrutiny and private challenges, and for Dakota, who had inherited his stubborn streak and unyielding sense of justice, the evening was more than ceremony. It was legacy. The applause swelled again as another figure entered, this time through the opposite side of the grand stage. Jackie Chan appeared with his trademark grin, wearing a sleek white suit paired with sneakers, a deliberate mixture of elegance and playfulness. He waved broadly to the audience, his every gesture radiating warmth and humor. Where Chuck's presence drew reverence, Jackie's sparked laughter and delight. The crowd responded with cheers and whistles, some even rising from their chairs to clap in rhythm. Jackie paused mid-stage to bow theatrically, then suddenly pretended to trip on the edge of the carpet, spinning it into a comical roll that ended in a flawless kip-up. The hall erupted in laughter and applause. Chuck observed silently from his table in the front row, his gaze steady but without judgment. Dakota giggled softly at the antics, while Gina simply raised an eyebrow and whispered to her husband, "He hasn't changed a bit, has he?" Chuck allowed himself the faintest of smiles before returning his attention to the stage. Jackie seized a microphone, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared with infectious enthusiasm, "what a night. So many legends, so many fighters, and me, well, I'm just here to make sure no one falls asleep from too much discipline." The crowd laughed again, sensing the direction of his humor. He turned toward the section where Chuck sat, and his grin widened mischievously. "Ah, there he is, the man, the myth, the master of seriousness himself, Chuck Norris." The cameras swiveled instantly, projecting Chuck's composed face onto the giant screens that hung above the stage. The audience applauded loudly again, though now mixed with laughter at Jackie's framing. Chuck remained still, acknowledging the attention only with a slight nod, his expression unchanged. Jackie, feeding on the crowd's energy, continued. "Look at him, not a smile. Come on, Chuck, it's a party, not a math exam. You've got to loosen up. Maybe later I'll teach you how to fall off a ladder without breaking your neck. Much more useful than standing so still, don't you think? The crowd roared with laughter. Even some of the martial arts students in attendance, who revered Chuck as a near-mythical figure, could not resist the contagious humor of Jackie's jests. Dakota frowned slightly, leaning toward her mother. Why does he make fun of Dad like that? Everyone's laughing. Gina squeezed her hand gently. Your father doesn't mind. He knows what he represents. Let the man have his jokes. The truth always shows itself in time. Chuck kept his eyes fixed on Jackie, not with hostility, but with the calm focus of a man who had weathered countless challenges, both real and staged. To him, Jackie's humor was not insult but energy, a different philosophy of life expressed through acrobatics and comedy. Yet he also recognized the subtle undertone. Jackie was not merely joking, he was testing. The playful mockery had a purpose, and Chuck sensed that the evening was heading toward a demonstration neither of them had planned. As Jackie continued entertaining the crowd with his mixture of physical comedy and sharp wit, the air in the room shifted slightly. The laughter was genuine, but beneath it grew an edge of anticipation, as if everyone present expected the teasing to evolve into something more. And though Chuck remained still, every instinct honed through decades of combat told him that before the night ended, he would be called upon not merely to represent karate as art, but to defend it against ridicule, and to do so in a way that would reach far beyond the walls of the MGM Grand. The chapter closed on a frozen image projected above the stage. Jackie, grinning like a mischievous child, and Chuck, serene and unyielding, two men whose paths were about to collide, not with fists of destruction, but with philosophies destined to clash beneath the lights of Las Vegas. The laughter from Jackie's last quip still echoed through the massive hall of the MGM Grand when the shift began. It was subtle at first, just a ripple in the energy of the crowd, but for someone like Chuck Norris, who had spent a lifetime attuned to the rhythm of confrontation, it was unmistakable. Jackie had turned his light-hearted humor toward him once, and the audience had laughed. But now the spotlight lingered on Chuck, and Jackie seemed unwilling to let the moment go. The charity event, meant to celebrate martial arts in all their diversity, was becoming a stage for a duel of philosophies, and the audience, whether they realized it or not, was hungry for it. Jackie stepped to the center of the stage, microphone still in hand, his body loose and fluid as though he were about to perform one of his signature stunts. His grin broadened, and he bent slightly forward, peering toward Chuck's table. You know, he said, his voice amplified to every corner of the hall, I've watched all those karate demonstrations. Serious faces, rigid stances, every move like it's been measured with a ruler. Very impressive, very disciplined. But also, he let his voice trail off dramatically before suddenly imitating an exaggerated yawn. So boring. Who wants to spend their life standing still and waiting to strike when you could be flying through the air, climbing walls, rolling under tables? Life is about movement. The audience roared again, many clapping and stomping in encouragement. Jackie, sensing their approval, straightened and bounced lightly on his feet as though warming up for something. He shifted into a parody of a karate stance, his knees bent awkwardly, his hands held stiff and far too high, his eyes squinting in an exaggerated scowl. Then he froze, locked in place like a statue. After several long seconds, he tilted his head and pretended to snore, his knees trembling as though he might collapse from boredom. See? He exclaimed suddenly, jerking out of the stance into a playful roll across the stage. I almost fell asleep myself. The crowd erupted again, this time louder than before. Even some of the seasoned martial artists in attendance found themselves laughing at the sheer absurdity of the impression. Chuck remained seated, his expression unchanged, though his daughter Dakota shifted uncomfortably beside him. She leaned closer to her father, her voice small but urgent. Dad, he's making fun of you. Everyone's laughing at karate. Her eyes flicked to the big screens, where Jackie's antics were being replayed in real time. Each motion magnified, each laugh amplified. Gina placed a hand gently on her daughter's arm, her voice calm. Your father knows what this is. Let him handle it. Jackie wasn't finished. Emboldened by the crowd's reaction, he bounded toward the edge of the stage, pointing toward Chuck as the cameras followed his every move. But maybe I'm wrong, he continued, his tone mock serious. Maybe karate has some secret that I don't understand. Maybe Mr. Norris can show me. What do you think? He turned his head to the audience, cupping his ear theatrically. Should we find out tonight? The response was immediate. A chant rose from the back of the hall and spread forward, catching fire as more voices joined. Chuck! 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 It began faintly, almost like a joke, but quickly swelled into a thunderous chorus. The sound vibrated in the floor, rattling the champagne glasses, shaking the walls. Within moments, the chant consumed the hall, drowning out even Jackie's amplified voice. Dakota's eyes widened as she looked at her father. They want you to fight him, she whispered. Chuck finally moved. He lifted his glass, took a slow sip of water, and set it down deliberately. Only then did he speak, his voice low enough that only those at his table could hear. I don't perform for the sake of performance. His eyes stayed fixed on Jackie, who stood at the edge of the stage, grinning like a mischievous child, basking in the frenzy he had stirred. Jackie raised his free hand in mock defense. Oh, come on, Chuck, don't be shy. We're among friends. This isn't about fighting. It's about showing the people the difference. Your way, he dropped into another stiff imitation of karate, and my way, he cartwheeled across the stage, ending with a cheeky bow. The crowd roared its approval, chanting both names now. Jackie! Jackie! And Chuck! Chuck! Competing in a rolling wave of sound. Chuck remained still, but Gina leaned closer to him, her voice calm and measured. Sometimes the lesson isn't for you, she murmured. Sometimes it's for the one who thinks laughter is strength. Jackie took another step forward, emboldened by the cheers. He leaned on the ropes at the front of the stage, his face mischievous, his voice raised. What's the matter, old friend? Afraid? Or maybe just too serious to have a little fun? His words were playful, but beneath the humor was a sharp edge. The audience gasped collectively, recognizing the shift from lighthearted jest to something resembling a challenge. Chuck finally lifted his gaze fully to meet Jackie's. The camera zoomed in, projecting his expression across the giant screens. It was calm, controlled, but unyielding. He did not smile, did not frown, only regarded Jackie with the same stillness that had unnerved countless opponents before. The chant reached a fever pitch. The audience was no longer content with jokes. They wanted something real. Jackie grinned wider, sensing he had pulled the room completely into his orbit. He turned back to the crowd, spreading his arms theatrically. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we make history. Karate versus Kung Fu. The mountain against the whirlwind. His words ignited the crowd into fresh applause, whistles, and cheers. At his table, Chuck exhaled slowly. Dakota clutched her mother's hand. He's calling him out, Mom. Gina's eyes never left her husband. He knows, and he'll decide when the moment is right. The atmosphere inside the hall had transformed. What had begun as laughter at a beloved comedian's antics was evolving into something more intense. The audience leaned forward in their seats, their laughter replaced by eager anticipation. They had come for a charity celebration, but now they were hungry for spectacle, for conflict, for a meeting of two philosophies embodied in two men who stood at the extremes of martial arts tradition. And though Chuck Norris had not moved more than an inch since Jackie began, the weight of expectation pressed heavier with every passing second. Jackie's jokes were no longer just entertainment. They were a challenge, one that the crowd demanded he answer. The tension hung thick in the air, as if the very walls of the MGM Grand held their breath. Jackie danced back toward the center of the stage, beckoning Chuck with playful gestures, and the chant of, "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck!" shook the ceiling like thunder. All eyes turned to the man in the front row, waiting to see whether discipline would remain seated or rise to confront the whirlwind of humor and acrobatics now daring him to respond. The chant continued to roll like thunder through the vast hall of the MGM Grand. It no longer sounded like the playful roar of an amused crowd, but the deep, unified voice of thousands demanding a verdict. Jackie Chan stood in the center of the stage, feeding off the energy like a seasoned performer who knew precisely how to draw every last ounce of attention. He waved his arms, cupped his hands to his ears, and beckoned toward the audience as if he were conducting an orchestra of chaos. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" They bellowed, their voices echoing against the high ceilings, rattling the chandeliers, spilling into every corner of the room. It was as if the walls themselves were vibrating with expectation. Chuck Norris remained seated in the front row, his posture unyielding, his face composed. His glass of water sat untouched now, the condensation dripping lazily down its side, unnoticed. Dakota clung to her mother's hand, her young eyes darting between Jackie's antics on stage and her father's calm stillness. She leaned closer to him, her voice urgent, almost pleading. "Dad, they're laughing. He's making fun of you. Everyone's watching. You can't just sit there." Chuck's eyes remained on Jackie, but his voice was gentle when he answered. "It doesn't matter if they laugh. Respect is not won with noise." Jackie, sensing the tension his words and gestures had created, leaned dramatically on the edge of the stage and pointed directly at Chuck. "Come on, my friend. Don't hide behind that calm face. This is Las Vegas. The world is watching. Show us that karate is more than just standing still. Or are you too old for this?" His voice, playful as always, carried a new sharpness that made the crowd collectively inhale. For the first time, Chuck moved. He turned his head slowly toward his wife. Gina's eyes met his without fear, without pressure, only quiet strength. She leaned close enough that her words were heard only by him. "You don't need to prove anything to them. But sometimes a lesson isn't for you. Sometimes it's for the one who mocks what he doesn't understand." Chuck let her words settle. He remembered all the times over the years he had encountered doubt and ridicule, from opponents who underestimated him, from critics who dismissed martial arts as nothing more than choreographed moves. He remembered the long days of training, the endless repetition of simple techniques, the philosophy his teachers had instilled in him about humility, discipline, and respect. He had never sought to humiliate anyone, never needed the applause of a crowd to validate his path. And yet tonight, in this hall filled with expectation, he felt the weight of something larger than himself pressing down. It was not about defending his honor. It was about defending the very essence of what karate stood for. Jackie continued to circle the stage, playing to the audience, mimicking karate movements with exaggerated stiffness, then breaking into rolls and flips that drew laughter and cheers. He shouted above the noise, "What's wrong, Chuck? Maybe karate is only strong in the movies? My kung fu can fly, can fall, can laugh. Can your karate do anything but stand there like a statue?" The chant surged louder again, almost deafening now. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The audience leaned forward in their seats, phones raised to capture what might unfold. Every pair of eyes locked on the man in the front row, who had yet to rise. The atmosphere was no longer one of comedy. It had transformed into an arena of challenge, and the crowd craved resolution. Dakota's small hand tightened around her father's arm. "He's calling you a coward," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't let him." Chuck lowered his eyes briefly to his daughter, seeing in her expression the same fire he himself had carried as a young man. He placed his hand gently over hers and whispered, "Patience is stronger than anger, but sometimes even patience must stand." He rose. The movement was simple, unhurried, almost ordinary, but in that instant, the roar of the crowd faltered, replaced by a sharp intake of breath from thousands of throats at once. The sight of Chuck Norris standing, his shoulders squared, his expression calm yet resolute, carried a gravity that silenced laughter in an instant. Even Jackie paused mid-gesture, his playful grin wavering as he registered the shift in atmosphere. Chuck straightened his blazer with one deliberate motion, his eyes never leaving Jackie. He adjusted the cuffs of his shirt, not out of vanity, but as though preparing himself for something inevitable. He walked slowly toward the edge of the stage, each step measured, steady, like a drumbeat that grew louder in the collective heart of the audience. The chant that had filled the room began to change. No longer a raucous demand, it became reverent, almost solemn. "Chuck! Chuck!" Jackie, recovering quickly, plastered his grin back in place. "There he is!" he shouted into the microphone. "Finally the man of stone moves. I thought you might have fallen asleep out there." He performed a quick somersault and sprang to his feet, arms outstretched. "Come, Master Norris, show us what karate can do against kung fu," with a smile. Chuck stopped at the base of the stairs leading to the stage. A security guard hesitated there, uncertainty in his eyes. But Chuck gave him a small nod, and the man stepped aside without a word. Chuck ascended slowly, each step echoing with a gravity that seemed to press down on the very air inside the hall. Behind him, Gina watched with quiet pride, though her hand remained on Dakota's shoulder, steadying her daughter's trembling. "Trust him," she whispered. "He doesn't rise for pride. He rises for purpose." As Chuck reached the stage, Jackie performed another playful bow, his grin bright, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of something else, curiosity, perhaps even caution. The two men stood now only a few feet apart, one radiating energy and humor, the other embodying discipline and stillness. The contrast was stark, the anticipation unbearable. Chuck spoke at last, his voice calm, carrying easily without the need for a microphone. "You mistake stillness for weakness. You mistake patience for fear. Tonight, you will learn the difference." The crowd erupted, a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the MGM Grand. Jackie spread his arms again, laughing as though to dispel the tension. But the shift was undeniable. This was no longer comedy. This was a challenge accepted. The evening, which had begun as celebration, had become something else entirely. The stage was no longer just a platform for entertainment. It was an arena. And as the lights glared brighter, as the cameras focused in, as the entire audience leaned forward on the edge of their seats, the two legends stood face to face, one fueled by laughter, the other by discipline, both about to collide in a spectacle no one had anticipated, but everyone now demanded. The moment stretched, timeless and heavy, as though history itself was holding its breath. And then, with a small gesture, Chuck removed his blazer and handed it to the nearest official, his eyes never leaving Jackie's. The path had been chosen, the hesitation ended. The clash of philosophies was no longer hypothetical. It was about to begin. The roar of the audience had not subsided since Chuck stepped onto the stage. The MGM Grand Ballroom, designed for galas and banquets, had transformed into something closer to an arena, with every pair of eyes locked on the two men who now faced one another. The cameras zoomed in tightly, the screens above magnifying the contrast for all to see. Jackie Chan with his relaxed posture and playful grin, Chuck Norris with his stillness and steady gaze. No announcer had called this confrontation. No promoters had scripted it. Yet it was unfolding with a momentum that felt unstoppable. Jackie bounced lightly on his feet, rolling his shoulders with a casualness that belied the tension buzzing through the hall. He raised his arms in mock combat stance, his elbows flared awkwardly, his hands wobbling as though he were unsure how to hold them. The crowd laughed at the parody, many clapping in rhythm to his exaggerated movements. "See?" Jackie said, grinning at the audience. "Karate is too stiff. Kung Fu knows how to move." He suddenly leapt forward into a dramatic cartwheel, landing in a low stance, then popped back up with a mischievous bow. Chuck did not move. He remained where he stood, his arms resting loosely at his sides, his body balanced, his expression calm. The contrast only heightened the crowd's excitement. They laughed with Jackie, but watched Chuck with growing anticipation, as though every second of stillness was a coil, tightening, waiting for release. Jackie tilted his head, still grinning. "You won't even move," he teased. "Are you a statue, Mr. Norris? Maybe I should put sunglasses on you so you look alive." The laughter rolled again, though it was tinged now with nervousness. Jackie darted forward suddenly, throwing a quick series of light strikes, palm slaps, and playful jabs, clearly meant more as performance than as true attacks. Chuck shifted only slightly, his movements so minimal they were almost imperceptible. He stepped just enough to let each strike pass harmlessly, his body tilting or pivoting at the last possible moment. The audience gasped at the precision, their laughter giving way to awe. Then, with a single fluid motion, Chuck extended his palm and touched Jackie's shoulder. It was not a strike, not even forceful, just a firm placement that redirected Jackie's momentum. Jackie, already off balance from his theatrics, flipped naturally into a roll and sprang back to his feet. The crowd exploded in cheers. To them, it was both entertainment and revelation. Jackie's acrobatics meeting Chuck's calm precision in a spectacle that looked almost choreographed. yet carried the unmistakable weight of reality. Jackie laughed loudly, clapping his hands. Good, very good, but can you keep up with this? He launched himself into another flurry of movement kicks snapping high, spins flowing into sweeps, a whirlwind of motion that dazzled the eye. The audience roared with delight, their cheers echoing through the hall as Jackie's movements blurred into a seamless performance. Chuck waited, his eyes tracking every motion with the patience of a hunter. When Jackie's foot whipped toward his chest, Chuck pivoted on his heel, letting the strike pass by as though it had never been aimed at him. When Jackie spun into a low sweep, Chuck shifted his weight just enough to let the legs skim beneath him. Each time his response was economical, precise, requiring no more effort than absolutely necessary. And then, when the moment was right, he stepped in close and tapped Jackie's wrist with 2 fingers, redirecting the flow of the attack into empty air. The audience gasped again, then cheered wildly. They had expected perhaps a sparring match, but what they saw instead was a demonstration of 2 entirely different philosophies. Jackie moved like water, unpredictable and playful, using the entire stage as his canvas. Chuck stood like stone, immovable until motion was required, and when he did move, it was with the sharpness of a blade cutting through chaos. Jackie, never one to lose momentum, somersaulted backward, then sprang up with his trademark grin. He wagged a finger at Chuck. You're tricky, always so serious. But can you handle this? He sprinted toward the edge of the stage, ran 2 steps up the wall, and pushed off into a twisting kick that arced toward Chuck's head. The crowd screamed, half in delight, half in fear. At the last instant, Chuck sidestepped and raised his arm, not to strike, but to guide. His forearm caught Jackie's leg midair, redirecting it safely downward, and with his other hand he steadied Jackie's shoulder, setting him back on his feet as gently as if he were lowering a child. The crowd fell silent for a heartbeat, stunned by the combination of control and restraint. Then the silence broke into a thunder of applause, not laughter this time, but genuine admiration. Jackie's grin faltered for the first time. He straightened, breathing slightly harder than before, and looked at Chuck with something that was not quite humor. You don't hit, he said, almost to himself. You only move. You only control. Chuck finally spoke, his voice low but carrying easily in the hushed hall. Control is the essence of power. Without it, power is chaos. The audience erupted again, this time not with laughter but with cheers of agreement. Phones flashed as cameras captured every angle. Commentators whispered hurriedly into headsets, and somewhere in the back of the room a chant began again, low and steady. Chuck, Chuck, Chuck. Jackie, unwilling to lose the momentum, clapped his hands together and bowed theatrically. Very good, Master Norris, but the night is young. Let us show them more. He darted forward once more, his movements faster, sharper, the playfulness giving way to real technique. He struck with fists and feet, his attacks timed to test rather than amuse. Chuck responded the same way he always had, with minimal motion, with precision, with patience. Each strike that came near him was deflected, each attack redirected, every movement flowing into the next like a river parting around a rock. And as the audience watched, the laughter that had filled the room earlier was gone completely, replaced by an energy that felt reverent, almost solemn. The first clashes had begun, and though no blows had landed with true force, everyone in the MGM Grand understood that something deeper was taking place on that stage. This was no longer comedy nor even spectacle. It was philosophy made flesh humor colliding with discipline, artistry colliding with stillness. Jackie Chan and Chuck Norris stood not as actors but as teachers, and their lesson was only just beginning. The roar of the audience had shifted into something different now, a current that carried less laughter and more awe. Moments earlier, they had been doubled over with amusement as Jackie leapt and rolled across the stage, mocking karate's rigidity with every exaggerated yawn and stumble. But now the energy in the MGM Grand Ballroom had become charged with something heavier. The playfulness remained in Jackie's movements, yet beneath it everyone sensed a rising tension. Each time Chuck redirected a strike, each time he stepped aside by only a fraction of an inch, the crowd gasped. What had begun as spectacle was revealing itself as something much more profound. Jackie bounded across the stage again, bouncing off a column to perform a mid-air twist that ended in a sharp kick toward Chuck's chest. The audience erupted in cheers, expecting perhaps that this time, surely Chuck would be caught off guard. Yet at the precise moment of impact, Chuck shifted his weight, pivoted his body just enough that Jackie's foot sliced through empty air. Without striking, without pushing, Chuck extended his hand to Jackie's shoulder and sent him tumbling safely into a roll. Jackie sprang back to his feet in one fluid motion, raising his hands to the audience as though the tumble had been his intention all along. They clapped and whistled, but the laughter was weaker now, tinged with the knowledge that the balance of control had subtly changed. "Very good," Jackie shouted with a grin, though his eyes narrowed in concentration. "Very, very good." He shook his arms loose, then charged forward again, unleashing a rapid combination of kicks and punches that blurred in the light. The crowd leaned forward in their seats, their voices rising in a chorus of anticipation. Cameras flashed, capturing the blur of Jackie's whirlwind and the still figure of Chuck, who stood waiting like a mountain against a storm. And then it happened again. Each kick was met with a subtle shift. Each punch was brushed aside with the gentlest of motions. Chuck did not strike. He did not retaliate. He merely guided Jackie's ferocity away, allowing it to dissipate into nothingness. The rhythm of the room changed. Instead of laughter, there were gasps. Instead of whistles, there was silence. In the front row, Dakota clutched her mother's hand tightly. Her young eyes were wide, and she whispered almost to herself, "He's not fighting him. He's teaching him." Gina's calm voice answered, "That's always been his way." On the stage, Jackie attempted another signature stunt. He vaulted onto a chair, balanced precariously, then sprang into a flying kick aimed at Chuck's head. The audience screamed with delight, expecting impact. But Chuck, calm as ever, took one step forward into the arc of the kick, raised his arm and redirected Jackie's momentum. With careful precision, he caught Jackie midair and lowered him gently to the ground, standing him upright as though helping a friend back to his feet. The crowd froze. The silence was heavy, pressing down on everyone in the room. Then a murmur began, swelling quickly into a wave of sound. It was not laughter now nor mockery. It was awe. They had seen acrobatics before. They had seen spectacle and stunts. But what they had just witnessed was something else entirely. Power exercised with restraint. Strength wrapped in gentleness. Jackie's grin faltered. For the first time that night, he looked at Chuck with seriousness. He bowed his head slightly and whispered, "You could have thrown me. You could have ended that." Chuck's voice was quiet, but it carried through the hushed hall. A true strike is not about what you can do. It is about what you choose not to do. The audience erupted, but differently now. They rose to their feet, applauding with thunderous force. The chant of "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck" rose again, not as a demand for violence, but as a recognition of mastery. The energy had turned. Where they had once cheered for Jackie's antics, they now stood in reverence for Chuck's control. Jackie felt the weight of the moment pressing on him. He wiped sweat from his brow, his chest rising and falling with exertion, while Chuck stood across from him, calm and steady, his breathing measured, his suit jacket gone but his presence as composed as ever. Jackie's showmanship had met its limit. The crowd no longer laughed at karate. They no longer saw stiffness or boredom. They saw discipline, mastery, and patience in its purest form. And yet Jackie was not finished. His pride as a performer, his identity as a man who turned combat into art, demanded more. He raised his hands again, motioning to the crowd. "Do you want more?" he shouted, his voice echoing. The response was immediate and thunderous. The audience, now standing, clapped and shouted, not in laughter but in fervent anticipation. Jackie's grin returned, though it was tempered now by respect. He darted forward once more, but his movements had changed. Gone was the exaggerated parody. Gone were the cartoonish stumbles and yawns. His strikes were real now, sharp and precise, aimed not at entertaining, but at testing. Chuck met him the same way. No grand gestures, no wasted effort. Each block, each step, each redirection was perfect, economical, exact. And with each movement, the crowd shifted further from amusement to awe. They began to understand. This was no longer just a contest of styles. It was a dialogue, a conversation of philosophy spoken through motion. Jackie's humor and fluidity pressed against Chuck's stillness and discipline, and the two created something greater than spectacle. The turning of the crowd was complete. Where once they had laughed at karate, now they watched in reverent silence, broken only by thunderous applause after each exchange. They no longer wanted to see who would win. They wanted to see what truth might be revealed. The night had begun with comedy, but now it was becoming a lesson, not just for Jackie, but for everyone present. And as the chant of Chuck's name filled the air once more, louder and more unified than ever before, Jackie Chan realized that this was no longer a performance he controlled. It was something else entirely, something that might change both him and the crowd forever. The applause rolled like thunder through the MGM Grand, wave after wave of clapping hands and rising voices that shook the chandeliers above. Jackie stood at the center of the stage, his chest heaving, his forehead beaded with sweat, but his grin had softened into something more restrained. The crowd that had laughed at his jokes earlier was no longer laughing. Their cheers now belonged not to the acrobatics, not to the stunts or the parodies, but to the still figure of Chuck Norris, who remained calm, steady, and composed, as if nothing that had transpired had been a contest at all. The shift was undeniable. The room that had once been filled with mockery was now filled with reverence. Jackie held up a hand, quieting the applause. He looked at Chuck with a seriousness that surprised even himself. Gone was the exaggerated smile, the twinkle of mischief. What remained was the look of a man who had just come to terms with something he had not expected to learn. His voice when he spoke carried to the farthest corners of the hall, but it trembled with an honesty that cut deeper than his humor ever could. "You don't strike back," he said, his eyes narrowing as though studying the older man for the first time. "You don't try to win, you only stand and you wait. I laughed at you for that, but now—" He paused, lowering his head, then looked back up. "Now I see what I was really laughing at, myself." The silence that followed was profound. For a heartbeat, the massive hall of thousands was so quiet that one could hear the faint hum of the lights overhead. Then the silence was broken by a single burst of applause, then another, until the room erupted again into a roar of approval. But it was different now. No longer the applause of an entertained crowd, but the applause of people who knew they had just witnessed something significant. Chuck stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate, each step echoing with quiet authority. When he spoke, his words were measured, his tone calm but firm, the way a teacher addresses a student not to belittle, but to instruct. "Humor inspires," he said. "It lifts spirits. It eases pain. It makes burdens lighter. But discipline teaches. It shapes, it refines. It turns strength into purpose. Without it, even the greatest skill becomes nothing more than a trick." Jackie stood still, his hands lowered, his playful energy drained from him. He nodded slowly, his chest rising and falling, as though each breath carried the weight of understanding. He turned toward the audience, lifting the microphone again, his voice steadier now. "Tonight I came here to make you laugh. I thought discipline was just stiffness, just stone. I mocked it. I mocked him. But now—" He gestured toward Chuck, his voice breaking for a moment before he steadied it. "Now I understand. Behind his calm is a strength greater than mine. Behind his stillness is power I cannot match. And behind his silence is a wisdom I can only hope to learn." The crowd roared, many rising to their feet. The chant that had once been playful now thundered with reverence. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The sound shook the very rafters of the hall, and Jackie let it wash over him with humility. He bowed low, not the theatrical bow of a performer, but the deep bow of a student before a master. Chuck extended his hand. It was not the gesture of a victor, but the invitation of a teacher. Jackie hesitated only a moment before stepping forward and taking it, their hands clasped firmly, the stage lights casting their silhouettes across the towering screens above. It was an image that would linger long after the night had ended. Two legends standing not as rivals, but as men who had found truth in one another. The roar of the audience swelled again, louder than before. Some shouted, some clapped until their hands were red. Others simply stood in silence, overwhelmed by what they had witnessed. But in every face there was recognition that something had shifted, that this was not just entertainment, but a lesson, a story they would carry with them long after the evening was over. Dakota, seated with her mother in the front row, tugged at Gina's sleeve. Her young voice trembled with wonder. "Now I see, Mom. I see why Dad never gets angry when people laugh at him. I understand why he doesn't need to fight back. It's not weakness, it's strength." Gina smiled softly, her eyes fixed on her husband. "Yes," she whispered, "and tonight, everyone here understands it too." On stage, Jackie leaned closer to Chuck, his voice too low for the crowd to hear, but caught by the microphones nonetheless. "Tonight we didn't fight. Tonight you taught me. And for that, I thank you, Master Norris." Chuck inclined his head slightly, his expression serene. Respect is earned not through victory, but through understanding. They released their handshake, but the moment lingered in the air, like the final note of a symphony. The crowd continued to cheer, the chant rising once more until the very walls trembled with the sound. But for the two men at the center of it all, the noise was distant, secondary to the silent exchange of recognition that had just taken place. What had begun as mockery had ended as revelation. The clash of humor and discipline had not destroyed either man, but had elevated both, leaving the audience not with the thrill of a contest, but with the wisdom of a lesson. And as the lights blazed brighter and the cameras captured every angle, the world beyond the MGM Grand would soon know what those inside already understood. This was no fight. It was a demonstration of respect, restraint, and the true meaning of mastery. The crowd was still standing, applauding, shouting, chanting, when Jackie raised Chuck's hand high in the air. The image of the two of them, united in respect, filled the giant screens, a picture that no words could diminish. For a moment, the chaos of Las Vegas outside seemed far away. In here, in this hall filled with thousands of voices, two men had given a different kind of performance, one that would outlive the bright lights and loud cheers. And in that moment, as the chants thundered and the applause rained down, Chuck Norris knew that the lesson had been delivered. Jackie Chan had understood, and through him, so had everyone else. The confrontation was resolved not with fists, but with truth. The roar of the crowd at the MGM Grand still echoed like rolling thunder long after the confrontation between Chuck Norris and Jackie Chan had dissolved into something far greater than spectacle. People remained on their feet, clapping, cheering, their chants filling the vast space until it seemed the very rafters trembled with each repetition of Chuck's name. Yet on stage, the noise seemed distant, almost muted, as Chuck stood calmly beside Jackie, their hands raised together in mutual acknowledgement. What began as mockery had ended as revelation, and everyone present felt that they had witnessed a story they would never forget. Chuck lowered his hand and turned slightly, his expression still calm, but now touched with the faintest trace of a smile. Jackie, his trademark grin subdued into something quieter and more genuine, stepped back and gestured for Chuck to take the final moment. The spotlight shifted, catching the lines of Chuck's weathered face, illuminating him not as an actor in a stage performance, but as a master who had just delivered a lesson without a single unnecessary strike. The applause swelled louder, but Chuck did not bask in it. Instead, his gaze found the front row where Gina and Dakota stood among the crowd, their faces lit with pride and relief. As he stepped down from the stage, the audience parted instinctively, creating a path for him. Security made no attempt to intervene. They, like everyone else, sensed that what had just unfolded transcended the ordinary boundaries of entertainment. Jackie remained on stage, bowing again and again, his earlier mockery now completely gone, replaced by respect. He called into the microphone, his voice earnest. "Tonight I learned something more valuable than applause. Tonight I learned that laughter can bring joy, but discipline can bring truth. Thank you, Master Norris." The crowd roared its approval, but the words belonged to Chuck, and they followed him as he walked back to his family. Dakota ran to meet him, her eyes wide and shimmering. She threw her arms around his waist, holding him tightly as though afraid he might vanish under the lights. "Dad," she whispered fiercely, "now I understand. I understand why you never get angry when people laugh. I saw it tonight. You didn't need to hurt him to win. You showed everyone what strength really is." Chuck placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, bending slightly to meet her gaze. "True strength isn't about winning or losing," he said softly. "It's about choosing not to be controlled by anger. Power without restraint is only chaos. But with discipline, power becomes purpose." Gina stepped closer, her calm smile radiating pride. She touched Chuck's arm lightly, her voice steady. "You taught them all tonight. Not just Jackie, not just this audience, but everyone watching. They'll remember what they saw long after the lights fade." Chuck nodded slowly. "If even one person leaves here tonight understanding that control is greater than violence, then the lesson was worth it." He looked toward the stage where Jackie still bowed, then back at his wife and daughter. "But the greatest lesson isn't for them. It's for us, to live with discipline every day, not only when others are watching." The crowd, sensing the end of the moment, erupted again, their applause carrying a reverence that had not been present at the beginning of the evening. This was not the hollow cheer of spectators satisfied with spectacle. It was the genuine respect of people who had been shown something deeper than entertainment. Phones were raised, cameras flashed, and voices shouted both men's names. But beneath it all, there was a newfound quietness in the hearts of many, a realization that they had seen discipline triumph not by force, but by clarity. Jackie stepped down from the stage and approached Chuck. The two men met in the center of the aisle, surrounded by the roar of thousands. Jackie bowed deeply, his voice sincere. "Tonight I thought I would make a joke, but you turned my laughter into a lesson. Thank you for showing me." Chuck extended his hand, and Jackie clasped it firmly. There was no triumph in Chuck's face, only calm acknowledgement. "Respect is the heart of martial arts," he said. "Without it, skill is empty. Tonight you gave the people laughter, and I gave them discipline. Together we gave them truth." Jackie nodded, a small smile returning to his face. Then it was not a fight at all. It was a lesson. The crowd roared again, and together the two men turned to acknowledge them one final time. Then Jackie stepped back, allowing Chuck to walk with his family toward the exit. The chants continued, filling the hall with a power that transcended words. Yet for Chuck, the loudest sound was the quiet voice of his daughter beside him. "Dad," Dakota said softly as they moved through the throng, "I'll never forget tonight. I'll never forget how you stood there and didn't need to fight to show your strength. Someday I want to be like you." Chuck's heart softened at her words. He placed his arm gently around her shoulders, guiding her forward. "Then remember this," he said. "Strength is not in the fist, but in the choice. The choice to be patient, the choice to be kind, the choice to know when to act and when to wait. That's the path. Follow it, and you'll be stronger than I ever was." The MGM Grand shimmered with noise and light as the Norris family walked out into the Las Vegas night. Behind them, the crowd still cheered, their voices echoing long after the doors closed. The neon glow of the Strip spilled across the pavement outside, but the noise of the city felt muted compared to the lesson that lingered in the air. Jackie Chan's laughter had been silenced not by force, but by discipline, and in its place respect had bloomed, filling the night with a different kind of victory. As they reached their car, Gina glanced at her husband, her voice quiet and thoughtful. "Did you ever imagine it would end like this? That Jackie's jokes would turn into something so powerful?" Chuck smiled faintly, opening the door for her before answering. "Life has a way of turning laughter into truth when the moment is right. All we can do is be ready to meet it." He looked once more at the MGM Grand behind them, where the cheers still thundered in the night, then turned to his family. The lesson had been given, the truth revealed. And as they drove away beneath the neon lights of Las Vegas, Chuck Norris carried with him the quiet certainty that true strength would always outlast spectacle, that discipline would always outshine mockery, and that the greatest victory of all was not in defeating another, but in teaching them. Before you go, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next unbelievable story. Want more? Just click on one of the videos on your screen right now. Each one is even more shocking than the last. And if this story gave you chills, share it with your friends so they can experience it too.